The most positive thing about coming out is finally feeling completely at ease with yourself, not having to hide, not having to scurry around, make excuses, falsify things, pretend, and to be allowed to achieve your own psychic reality. It is a most wonderfully liberating process. There can sometimes be bumps in it, what they call turbulence in air transport, if the family is awkward about it. But increasingly, this does not happen. Parents now are much more accepting. Well, I mean, my friends, my close friends that I grew up with and played with, they knew, because when we went through this rather awkward transition into sexual beings, or into consciously sexual beings, they started taking this very peculiar and unhealthy interest in women. And I warned them against it. And I knew that I was normal and that they weren't, and I was terrified they'd get into trouble. So I tried to protect them. And gradually, through our discussions, it dawned on me that I was the odd one out and they were in the majority. So they always knew, but I wasn't kind of publicly out until the late 60s, early 70s. I got involved in the Southern Ireland Civil Rights Association, which was formed by analogy with Northern Ireland civil rights people, to try and press for political and various other kind of civil rights for Catholics and nationalists in the north of Ireland. But at the first meeting, they were so self-congratulated. Of course, we're wonderful down here. We don't discriminate against anybody. They're all awful bigots in the north. And that absolutely irritated me. Plus, there was an extremely handsome young Dutchman on the other side of the aisle, in a room in Trinity. And I thought, hello, maybe he's another fairy. How can I let him know that I'm here? So I better raise a flag. So I erupted in indignation and said, I think this is all rather self-serving. But you say you don't discriminate against anybody, you don't discriminate against Protestants. Why would you? Because they're numerically small, financially powerful, and totally mealy-mouthed and subservient. But I said, I am also a member of another minority. I am a homosexual. We didn't say gay in those days, just homosexual, like the BBC always did it as if you're some kind of rare insect. Homosexual. So I acknowledged this, and of course it had the desired effect, because first of all it provoked a row, as a result of which at the end I was able to persuade them to include among their objectives the alteration of the criminal law against gay male behaviour in the South. And I also got to know the Dutch fellow, and I'm still friendly with him. And he's lovely, but he wasn't at all gay. In fact, he was devout Dutch Catholic. So it had a lot of positive things. And people said to me afterwards, colleagues in Trinity said, oh, that was a dreadful mistake. You know, that's your career gone. You know, what you should do is say that you're teasing. It was one of your usual provocative jokes. It was a practical joke. And I was a bit concerned after I'd said it for the first night. And then I said, well, what the hell? Trinity is supposed to be a liberal institution. Let's just call their bluff. And absolutely nothing happened. And then various little groups started forming. Yes, I mean, one of my mother's cousins was pretty rude to me, or rather her husband was. We called to see them. They'd had a very tragic life. I mean, the son was a brilliant engineer and he was killed in a bathing accident in Brisbane Bay, and the daughter was a talented artist, and she got lung cancer. Almost to the day, 10 years after she gave up smoking, which is a bit ironic. And we went out to see them at Christmas, and Herbert opened the door and he ignored me completely. And then he turned around and he said, do excuse me, I forgot to inquire for your boyfriend. And I said, I don't confine myself to one, but I do confine myself within the limits of good manners and breeding, which you obviously don't feel constrained to do. My aunt was so thrilled by the put down, she paid for my airfare to go to the first International Gay Rights Conference in Edinburgh in 1973.
Very good.
So he was snotty. And there was a bit of awkwardness and stiffness in certain aspects of the family, but they got used to it. And it certainly didn't help my career because there is an unconscious discrimination against gay people. There's no doubt about that. I was certainly an internationally known lecturer. I never got any promotion. It became a scandal until the provost intervened. And this is the lowest form of promotion. And people would say, oh, well, you're all over the newspapers, you're running this discotheque to make funds and so on and so forth. you couldn't be giving 100% to Trinity. But they neglected to observe that my colleagues were having affairs with each other, running around all over the place, drinking themselves into the shape of a triangle, going off golfing every weekend. I mean, what I chose to do with my spare time, on one occasion they instituted what they called the senior lecturer's exercise. One of my colleagues in the department wanted to find out, this was a mathematical assessment of how much work you did. It emerged I was doing about twice as much as everybody else, particularly the one who complained. But I just simply got on with it and did it, I may say, with my usual characteristic modesty, pretty bloody well. But I didn't moan about it. I did my work, and then I got on with doing the other things in my spare time. But ask women about the glass ceiling. It's exactly the same. Very little you can point to, but certainly you're held back. And in political terms, it was a very significant drawback. It took me a long time to get elected to the Senate. And one of my academic colleagues, Professor Annette Johnston Otway Riven, said in the common room in my hearing, they'll never elect a queer, you know. Well, they did, and here I am. In the old days, it was a little bit like that. I mean, any time I said or did anything, I used to be described as self-confessed homosexual David Norris. I never confessed it. I stated it. It wasn't a confession, because that suggests it was something either criminal or sinful. I didn't think there was either. So I objected to that. So how I got around it was I used to put out press statements where I said, yesterday afternoon in Oris Neutron, self-confessed retired heterosexual Eamon De Valera said blah, blah, blah. And everybody, I put a sexual label on them, no matter who I was talking. The Minister for Education, practicing heterosexual, and all this sort of stuff. So they eventually got the message. I mean, one does not think about the Minister for Hardship sexual practices. One necessarily blinds oneself to the fact that the majority of other people are sexual beings as well. It would be most unpleasant. It would be disturbing. Yeah. I think that being gay will be accepted as part of the spectrum of human sexuality. It's been around for a very long time. It's inspired some of the greatest works of art in painting, sculpture, literature, some of the greatest composers, all this kind of stuff. So it's part of the rich fabric. It has been. People are reluctant to accept that because of the rather puritanical streak in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. None of the great religions have ever told the truth about human sexuality. And perhaps in the 21st century, they might start doing it. Some of the Christian churches are beginning to show signs, particularly, I'm glad to say, the Anglican Church, to which I belong. Yes. But they also have the monsters, like Peter Akinola in Nigeria, who is an ignorant beast of a man, but he gets away with it because he's black, which, in my opinion, is inverted racism. If a man comes out with ignorant, hateful twistings of the Christian gospel message, then he sure should be reprimanded and told what he is. And I don't like this kind of toadying. But again, it's all about power and numbers. There are huge numbers of Anglicans in Africa, and the central authorities want to toady to them. They're afraid of a schism. I don't think a schism does the slightest bit of harm if you hold to the truth, and people will follow. Young people all over the developed world are completely alienated from all the churches because of the lying and corruption that is at their heart. And if Christianity wants to survive in the West, it wants to clean up its act, and it wants to start telling uncomfortable truths and having a prophetic voice rather than this kind of compromising, toadying, accommodating itself to prejudice. I'd hope it's easier to come out now. I fancy that it is, particularly for people in cities. Perhaps not quite so much in rural areas, where there's a smaller community and everybody is aware of other people's business and relationships and all the rest of it. And if somebody has a sexuality that is not the majority, of course people will be looking to see, well, I wonder, who's going in his door? This kind of stuff. You get that in small rural communities, everywhere, all over the world. And I think what's made it easier is the media. is the fact that now there are portrayals of gay characters in soap operas. There are major pop stars like George Michael, the late Stephen Gately, who are known to be gay. There are ministers in every government in Europe, cabinet ministers, who are gay. So there are now role models. And parents can also comfort themselves with the idea that it is not true that being gay leads to an unhappy, lonely, and miserable life. Gay people can look forward to a happy, positive, and constructive future, which is also very good for the country. I mean, look at the talent that was wasted because so many generations of gay people were either rendered miserable and neurotic by the awful, inappropriate pressures exerted on them by church and state, or driven out of the country. I mean, look what we've lost. I would say, like I say, when I go with my friend Nora bathing at the wonderful beach of Avdimu in Cyprus, come on in, the water's lovely. You'll enjoy it once you get over the shock. Well, I was lucky enough to be in the very early days, right at the beginning. It started with a series of meetings in Trinity, as far as I was concerned. It was the welfare officers of the students' unions throughout Ireland got together, and a big meeting was held in Trinity, series of meetings, and something called the Sexual Liberation Movement started in Trinity, the SLM, and there was a kind of a national 32-county body called the Union for Sexual Freedoms in Ireland. Now, it wasn't long, of course, before there was a couple of splits, and I was involved in every split. It was like kind of an amoeba. We kept dividing and getting stronger because there was about 8 or 9 people in that first SLM group, of whom 8 were definitely gay and 1 was a question mark. But we spent all our time writing letters to the newspaper about contraception. And I thought this was idiotic. You know, I said, look, we're all gay. You know, why don't we actually concentrate on what affects us? Plenty of other people writing about contraception. So that led to the first split. People wanted a general sexual liberation. I wanted stuff for gay people, because it wasn't anything. And I led the split, and I hammered out, during that period, the title of the first fully gay organisation, the Irish Gay Rights Movement. Because we were Irish, we were gay, we were looking for our rights, and we were a political movement. Now, at that time, the phrase Irish and gay, they were incompatible. You could not be both. No Irish person was gay. All them homosexuals were over in dirty pagan England, you see. Or else they were Protestants like Oscar Wilde, who couldn't really be Irish anyway. Or Casement, who was another Protestant fag. But they, and the denial of Casement sexuality was quite extraordinary, because I learnt about textual scholarship as an undergraduate in Trinity. Even from my undergraduate understanding of textual matters, it is absolutely impossible for Casement's diary to have been forged, unless the entire thing was a forgery from beginning to end, which is also physically impossible. So, I mean, the way they could not have been inserted, that's the point I'm making. And this is plain as anything. And people, including people who purport to be scholars, deliberately deluded themselves because psychologically they were incapable of accommodating the fact that a great Irish patriot like Roger Casement could be homosexual. And I think we should glory in Roger Casement because of his wonderful idealism. I don't mean just his rather pathetic involvement in 1916, which saw him destroyed. I mean, even more than that, the work he did in the Belgian Congo, as was then, which was my native land where I was born. And so I feel strongly about it. And the Belgians behaved atrociously there, particularly the Catholic king, as he liked to be called, Leopold of Belgium, who ran it as a private concentration camp for profit. There was mass slaughter, torture, squalor, misery, exploitation, and Casement exposed it and helped to bring about an easing of the situation. And then he went to South America and the Putumayo Indians. He was the savior, in as far as they were saved. And there was a program on RT television some years ago, and they went deep into the Amazon and they met this old chief. And he said in his broken English, "We need another casamente. I mean, what a wonderful tribute to somebody who's dead for 90 years. The memory is still alive because of the noble way in which he tried to rescue the humanity of these people. So it's wonderful for gay people to know that, yes, indeed, despite what official Ireland said, despite what reactionary religion said, Roger Casement was a hero, is a hero, and he was actively homosexual. In the early days of the gay movement, one of the principal energies was an attempt to provide a social background for gay people. We started with a little hop, a record hop, as they called it, the precursor to the discotheque. You had these plastic records and a gramophone, and you dropped the needle on the records, and everybody hopped up and down, clasped each other to their sweaty bosoms, and legged it around the room. And it was all terribly sensual and delightful and all the rest of it, and completely new. We thought about 20 people would come to our first one. About 300 turned up. So we saw there was money in it. And we devised a simple machine where we serviced the needs of the social needs of the gay community and charged them for it. That provided the money for us, even though we're a very amateur organisation, to secure offices, eventually premises, and so on and so forth. And that led to another split. Because I was very determinedly political as well as social. And I wanted to get the law changed and so on. Now we had a legal section which dealt with the situation where gay people got into trouble with the law, which they frequently did, hanging around dark areas down the quays, public lavatories, areas of inner city parks and all this kind of stuff. And they were natural victims, natural prey for both queer bashers on the one hand and the police on the other. And it was usually the most respectable people, the lawyers, the priests, the teachers and so on, who wouldn't come to our discotheque because that would be an open acknowledgement and they'd be afraid to come there. But they saw nothing about risking their lives going down the jacks and the quays. And we used to have to kind of look after them. They'd often ring up and they'd be very distressed. They'd been arrested. And you see, it was a good arrest for the young policeman who wanted to make his career because they always pleaded guilty. And we got the services of a wonderful young solicitor called Garrett Sheehan, who's now a judge. And I don't think he hardly ever, if ever, got paid. But he went down and he represented people in court. And eventually we achieved a 100% success rate. So the guards were finding it more and more difficult to get a conviction. And we decided then to go on the attack. And the first idea was to get one of the people who was arrested to take a constitutional line in defense. But nobody was prepared to. So eventually we built a case around my own experience as a gay man and the fact that when I was in my early 20s, I collapsed in a restaurant in Dublin. I was taken by fire brigade ambulance to Baker Street Hospital with a suspected heart attack. But they discovered that it wasn't a heart attack at all, it was what they called a panic attack. And that was because I was under severe psychological pressure. And of course, when I mentioned the fact that I was gay, it was all resolved around that. They thought there were other things happening. My mother had died. My brother was in difficulties. The fellow I was in love with had just got married and gone to live abroad. So there were a number of things, but being gay was a pressure. And the psychologist I was referred to, or psychiatrist, said his treatment was for me to go and live in the south of France. Because he said the psychological pressure of the existence of these laws is damaging to your health. You know. So I remembered that. That had happened 10 years previously. So I remember that. I was able to produce a psychiatrist. And that gave me locus standi. That gave me a reason to take on the law, that I could show that I had actually been damaged by it. So that was very useful. That led to a situation where, first of all, we gave it as a brief to Donald Barrington, who's now a very distinguished judge. And Donald was made a judge during the process, so although he wrote the first brief, he had to withdraw from the case. And he said that we were undoubtedly right intellectually and morally, but we'd have a difficult situation because it was also a political issue. And eventually we ended up with Mary Robinson as one of the barristers, Paul Carney, who's now a distinguished judge as well, and Garrett Cooney, who was a brother of the Minister for Defence. And they did the legal, intricate, intellectual aspects. I oversaw the political side of it because I saw it as a political thing. And I decided that we could use this to blow away the veil of silence that would cover the whole issue of homosexuality. And I arranged for us to have witnesses from international sources. We had the head of the American Psychiatric Association, John Spiegel, Professor Spiegel, at the time when they altered the classification and declared that homosexuality was not a disease. We had Rose Robertson, who had an organization to look after the parents of young gay people, because they suffered trauma as well. We had the Regent Professor of Psychiatry, Forensic Psychiatry in Cambridge. We had all kinds of people, and it meant it was in the paper day after day after day. And at the end, we got a very interesting judgment, because the judge said he accepted all our evidence. There were a surprisingly large number of gay people in Ireland, statistically, that they weren't criminal, they weren't mentally unbalanced, they weren't enfeebled in any way. In fact, they were just a mirror image of the population. And he accepted all this and all the arguments and so on. But at the end of it, he said, nevertheless, despite this, because of the Christian and democratic nature of the Constitution, I have to find against the plaintiff. That led to a hearing in the Supreme Court, where the Chief Justice, Mr. Tom O'Higgins, misdirected himself in law, because as Justice Henchy pointed out in his dissenting judgment, there was no question that I had won. I had to win, because all you can discuss and debate and decide on in the Supreme Court is the material issues and evidence presented to the lower court. And whereas I had presented any God's quantity of evidence, the government had signally failed to produce any evidence at all, which meant that I won a walkover. And McCarthy J., the other dissenting judge, gave a brilliant dissenting judgment, also looking at issues like locus standi. So that led us to the European Court, where eventually we won in, I think it was 1988. And it took the government 5 years to catch up. And the Taoiseach Albert Reynolds, who was a very decent man, actually said when he was questioned, it was said to him, of course, this has been determined to be a breach of fundamental human rights. I said yes, but it's not one of our priorities. And that was very interesting, that the Taoiseach of the land could say, well, we're actually fundamentally breaching human rights, but we're not too bothered. And thank God they got Maura Gagan Quinn as minister, who changed it. Because in the intervening period, it changed from Ray Burke to Maura Gagan Quinn, and that woman had more balls than the rest of the cabinet put together. She took on the issue. I think they were all afraid they'd be labelled fairies.
Very good.
Well, the reason I said it was like a dog license was because people like Martin Mansurge, who's kind of token prod, and Jim Walsh from Wexford, and Senator Mullen, who I have christened Monsignor Mullen, they came out and they were promoting this idea that the only way to get this through was to water it down to a point where it was virtually meaningless, where all kinds of other relationships will be taken into account, like a priest and his housekeeper, like two spinsters living together. And the word spinster was used. Two old bachelor farmers. They almost got down to a young man and his pet dog. And I thought, this is insulting. This is trying to define us once again into second-class citizenship. And I'm just not taking it anymore. I am just as much a citizen as the Mullins, Walshes and Mansurges of this life. And I will not be prepared to accept those kind of people trying to define me into second-class citizenship, which is what is actually happening. This is the attempt. And I have to say, with regard to the church, I find it astonishing that the church, in the light of all the reports of serial sexual abuse of children, should presume to intervene in this and to try and raise the spectre of a perceived threat to children in trying to destroy the rights of gay couples who already have children, sometimes the biological children of one of the partners, and they're trying to destroy the rights of these children. It shows an utterly callous disregard for the rights of children, and I think it's contemptible. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's equality or nothing. Now, I accept, and always have, the separation of church and state. I don't think the church can dictate to the Church of Rome, for example, that it must marry gay couples. I don't think that would be appropriate.
No.
But it's equally not appropriate for the church, particularly with its criminal record in this area, to sit in judgment on gay people. Yes, of course I've experienced homophobia. I mean, I got my ear clouted about 3 years ago down the road here. I just come back from recording thing with the BBC and they were farting around as usual, so I had to come on a late plane. I went down to get some milk at the shop, and I passed the door of the pub, and my pal, the proprietor, was there, and I exchanged a few words with him. He was just closing up shop, it was just midnight, and this trio went past and wanted to get in, and he said, no, we're closed. So they went down to try a low drinking establishment down the road. They were expelled from there too, and they came back, drifted by, and I was talking to John Fitzpatrick there, and as they went by, one of them said, you're the fellow off the television. The other fellow said, you're the fucking queer off the television. The woman grabbed me by the crown jewels, and I said, unhand me, madam, you know not what you touch, at which her beau hit me and said, you're fucking queer, and clattered me on the ear. So I asked John if he had they went off laughing, and I asked John if he had a mobile phone. So I rang the police, and the police said, could you give an accurate description of the external appearance, apparel, and approximate age group of your assailant? And I said, I could indeed, but no intention. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, if you think I'm going to stand here in the middle of Parnell Street with a thick ear, drooling into a phone, saying, assailant number one was neatly attired in a diamante outfit with matching accessories and shoes. You've another thing coming. If you get a car around here straight away, we'll nab them. And we did. And went to court. And I said, I don't want them sentenced. It's a waste of money of the part of the taxpayer. Just give them a bit of a smack and tell them to behave properly in future. And they cannot be attacking old fairies in the street. So, but they made him give me £1,000. It was wonderful.
Nice present.
Yeah, it was. A year later it arrived. Two nice guards came and knocked on the door, and they produced a brown envelope. And I said, well, I know what's in that. And I said, well, do you have the address of the young man? And they said, for what? And I said, well, common politeness dictates I should write and thank him. And they said, are you serious? They said, not on your life. But anyway, it was a welcome addition to the budget.
Definitely.
Well, as I think I said earlier in the interview,
Yeah.
every gay person will experience a glass ceiling. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And certain abusive remarks were made in the very early days in the Senate. I wasn't aware of the degree of hostility, apparently. They were terrified. And this makes me laugh. All these bloated old physical wrecks, thinking that I was going to jump on them in the corridor. I mean, there isn't one of them that I'd touch with a barge pole, far less anything else. And one occasion, when I just left the chamber, denounced me as a pervert, and the next day they made him apologise. So I said, oh no, I said, don't make poor old Willie apologise, because I wasn't really insulted. I said, you can only be insulted by somebody that you respect. Willie knows perfectly well I've no respect for him at all. So I made people laugh, and I turned around, and the fact that I was able to make people laugh, it opened their eyes and saw the human context. And that's it's completely irrelevant. I mean, people would yawn now at the prospect of me being gay. So what?
Exactly.
They've known. And the lovely thing is, there's a hunk that sits in front of me, Dominic Hannigan of the Labour Party. And I was talking to him there about 8 months ago in the restaurant. He was in with his family, and I said something about his wife. And he looked at me as if I had 6 heads. I didn't realise he's openly gay. And he campaigned as openly gay. There he is. So I'm no longer the only gay in the village. And it's lovely.
The government.
And he's a very good speaker. He's a handsome, attractive young man with a lot of political ideas, great facility, on his feet, contributes a lot. There's another role model for kids. He comes from rural Ireland. Yes, I'm sure there are people who have mildly homophobic things. I mean, if I wasn't gay myself, I probably would. You know, it's a relatively new social idea. And I think we've got to lead people and educate them and laugh them into understanding that it's not a particular threat to them. And very often you find that with people who are homophobic and neurotic about things, it's usually because they're afraid there's an element of it in themselves. And I remember when the whole decriminalisation thing was going through, one of my colleagues insisted on herding his Fianna Fáil confreres into a little room, trying to get them to campaign against it. And he gave them a pretty gory, full frontal description of what he saw as the practicalities of the plumbing of homosexual relations between men. And one of them came out of it afterwards and said, "Oh, jeez, David, I was nearly sick. The same you describe marriage, but do we want to know about, you know, the way he went on about, I'd say he was a bit of a snake and regarder himself." And I thought that was wonderful. And maybe it was true, who knows? Most people who are comfortable with their sexuality, as heterosexual men or women, they've more to occupy themselves with agonizing over whether two men or two women are having a pleasurable experience somewhere out of sight. Well, I mean, it's not just gay children. I was just thinking that when we were talking earlier on, you often have the situation now where parents come out as being gay because so many people, particularly men, were forced into marriage, which wasn't suitable for them. And that was a form of awful cruelty and abuse of their personality. And they were coerced into that by church and state. But with regard to the children, there are two approaches to this. One is the approach to the child, the young person, for whom coming out would be a liberation. But for the parent, it's almost universally a moment of at least doubt. Was I responsible? Why is my child different to the neighbours? What is the future going to hold? So I think the first thing they need is reassurance. And I'm not sure what the name of the group is now, but this wonderful woman, Rose Robertson, who started a group for parents of gay children in England called Parents Inquiry. We started a branch here. It's called something different now, but it can be contacted through the gay organisations like Outhouse and various other ones. I think it's important that parents who've been through this talk to parents who are just experiencing it. Because I always think it's important for like to talk with like.
Yeah.
It's very important for us in the early days to go around the country talking to other gay people, because we had the same experience. We were talking from inside exactly the same kind of experience that these people that we were talking to. So we understood each other, we were on the same wavelength. And I think it's the same for parents. You know, the parents of a gay child who've accommodated themselves to it, who have been able to see their child's life now again in a positive way, they're the people who will be believed by parents who may still, in this 21st century, be distressed by their child's sexuality. The other thing is, of course, parents can sometimes be terribly selfish. Now, I saw that as a tutor in Trinity. Sometimes the parents would try and force the children to do a course that reflected the vanity of the parents rather than the wishes or the motivation of the child. And it's the same with regard to sexuality. You know, parents are very close to children. They give birth to them, they nurture them, they educate them, they foster them, they love them, they care for them. And sometimes it's difficult to let go. And sometimes it's difficult to stop regarding a child as the property of the parents. And there's always a difficulty when a young person is growing to their sexuality, because it's a moment of separation from the parent. And unwise and immature parents will see the sexuality of their offspring as almost their possession and their right to determine. Well, it ain't.
we're going to wrap there, and I'm just going to ask you, is there anything you'd like to add to the interview?
Well, just to say, it's been a pleasure to do this interview, and I think it's very important that these subjects are discussed as openly as possible. And I hope that this will make a small contribution together with your other interviews. I hope everything goes well with the project and that it eventually reaches a wider audience.
Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being so honest.
You're welcome. Yeah.